Hey everybody, and welcome back to another book review. I just finished a really good book called Left to Tell by Immacule Ibagiza. And it is really deep book about the Rwandan genocide. So the story, it's a autobiography of Immaculate Ibagiza's time in hiding during the Rwandan genocide. So if you don't know about that, it happened in 1994, and it stemmed from years of um, just kind of pardon me, struggle and oppression that was going on in the country of Rwanda. And it all revolved around ethnic groups, which, um, as as a historian, I'm uh, acutely aware of the fact that when other countries colonized, they didn't really care about ethnic groups. They saw um, Africans as just one, just group of black people in space, right? And so they just divided up the continent of Africa into what we now know as the countries in Africa. And many of those countries have struggled with civil wars and battles and things like that over different ethnic groups because these ethnic groups were never originally living together. They had their own little, like they knew, like this is our space, that's your space, and we're good. But once all these European countries started colonizing those areas, they just kind of pushed them all together, and that didn't really go so well when a lot of those European countries left. And so Rwanda is an example of what happened after. So there were the main group that was in power politically was the Tutsi group, and then over time, the Hutus also wanted to be in power, and so there were power struggles and kind of going back and forth. And so eventually, the Hutu were able to kind of get like a president, not quite a president, kind of more of like a dictator, but dictator is like kind of the wrong word. But they were eventually able to get one. And there were a lot of Tutsis that had actually fled Rwanda in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so they didn't actually live in Rwanda anymore. They lived in Uganda, and they formed kind of a rebel group, and that group of people went back into Rwanda in the 80s and 90s and started trying to basically take back over. And so when they did that, all the Hutus freaked out for obvious reasons and started basically promoting propaganda of the fact that all Tutsis are bad and that we should just kill all the Tutsis. And that's quite literally what happened. So people literally turned on their neighbors. You had Hutus and Tutsis, and there's a third group called the Twa group as well, but they kind of mostly didn't really live in the villages so much. They were more kind of even more rural than what most of the people in Rwanda live, and um, a lot of the Hutus turned on the Tutsis and conducted mass genocide for about 100 days. Um, and this began in 1994 around Easter, and it ended in July of that year. Um, I, of course, was alive. I do not remember hearing about it or anything. I was four, so kind of a three, four at the time. So I don't really remember hearing too much about that. Um, and there were obviously other things going on in the world at the time, but one of the things that was really kind of a reminder, and every time I hear about the Rwandan genocide, is the fact that um, after World War II, after the Holocaust with World War II, the United Nations, which is obviously led by some of the great powers in the world, including the United States, said like, "Hey, we can't have that happen again because that's wild to just annihilate an entire group of people based on race or ethnicity or religion." Um, And it happened again with Rwanda, and no one intervened. You know, in fact, most European countries or outside countries pulled everybody that was theirs out of the area. And some of it has to do with, you know, it's like, hey, it's a them issue, not an us issue. Like, it has nothing to do with us. They got to figure that out. But mass genocide, it's kind of crazy. And unlike with the Jewish Holocaust, the Rwandan Holocaust, as they also call it, um, is, to me, far more violent. You know, the Jewish Holocaust, wild, bad. You know, taking people out to concentration camps, shooting them, killing them through gas chambers and torture. Yes, bad, very bad. The Rwandan genocide and the Rwandan Holocaust has a different level of it, because it's not just, you know, taking people out and shooting them, you know, or taking them to an isolated area and shooting them, or putting them into ghettos and then shooting them. This was literally your next door neighbor just showed up at your house and started hacking you to bits. So anyway, all of that to say, this book was, you know, inspiring. The point of the book, more or less, is that Immacule talks about how she really just put her faith in God, and how she feels like God brought her through all of that, all of the pain, all of the hiding. They were hiding in a bathroom, like a small bathroom. And I think there were 6 or 7 of them by the end of their time hiding. People got added in from the originals that were in the bathroom with her. And it was so cramped that, you know, they couldn't really even sit down. And they had to kind of rotate and you know, support each other. It was just a really grim situation. But then also that they were hiding in a pastor's bathroom, and how that pastor, even though he did what was right by hiding them and you know, supporting not just mass genocide of them, he also spewed some crazy hatred, you know, some lies and things about her family. And I like, every time she would talk about like how he was just spewing us hate, I was like, we're still doing that. You know, people just listen to whatever the general media says about a group. In the United States, it tends to be more political. But you know, people just listen to, oh, well, the media said this and the media said that. And in the book, this happens. This pastor comes in, he starts yelling at Immacule about the fact that her father was holding guns, and that he had all these weapons, and he had this mass kill list of Hutus, and that's why they're looking for her specifically. And she's like, okay, yeah, but if that was the case, then how come he didn't like come kill you, you know? Or how about the fact that all of these people came to our house, all these Tutsis came to our house seeking help? Why didn't he just pass out the weapons and then, you know, send them out to murder you guys? Like, make it make sense. You know, it's just, you just hear that all the time today, just that kind of, well, this is what they're saying and that's why you're doing it, and blah blah blah. And people are like, okay, yeah, but if we would have. But I mean, it really is a powerful story. It's definitely a hard story. I audiobooked a good chunk of it, just because I was moving around the house. But it's definitely not one that ends on an upper. It does, you know, end on a happy note in that she survives. She gets reunited eventually with her older brother, who was away at university, so he didn't really know what was going on. But the rest of her family is murdered. Mom, dad, 2 brothers, the other 2 brothers, you know, grandparents, aunts, uncles, all of that. It's just, it's definitely a hard one to hear. It's not, you know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily as graphic as I think some depictions of the genocide could be, but it definitely has some graphicness to it, especially as she begins working towards being a translator, and she's writing down everyone's stories that she shares some of those stories. And I think the one that kind of caught me was she talked about these two little boys. They were 3 and 4, and they're orphans. And the 4-year-old, the older one, kept saying, "Don't worry, Mom and Dad are going to come back," and knowing that their parents had been literally murdered in front of them, and they just didn't understand that yet. And just, to think about like how that would have felt, because I was that age when this was all happening. How would they feel? How, and then of course, what happened to them? Some of the things you don't really get kind of a wrap up on the stories, and I'd be curious to know what happened to those young boys. But it's just, really, really interesting story. I don't give it a 5 only because it's a hard one to get through, and I just wanted more wrap up. But the story, I think the book was originally published in 2006 maybe, and there is a follow-up story, so maybe if I read that one, then I would get more information there. But yeah, kind of a dark one, and kind of hard to get through, but it was on the recommendation list. Thank you to Mrs. Beasley, my 4th and 7th grade teacher of social studies and literature and everything. She sent me a list of books years ago, and I totally forgot to put them on the list, so sorry, because I'm just getting to them. But I'm glad that I've gotten around to reading some of those from her, and so this was one of those books that she recommended. So thank you to Mrs. Beasley for that. And as always, please continue to send book recommendations. I usually put them into my list, but apparently I didn't put the 8 books that you recommended into the list, so they're going to get into circulation now. But thank you again for recommendations. Please continue to send recommendations, and I look forward to seeing you in the next book review. Bye!